Welcome to the multiverse of anime. If you enjoy exploring alternate realities where pride reshapes destiny, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our channel for more mind-bending stories. Picture this. The Tournament of Power arena lies in absolute ruins. Bodies of the strongest fighters from across 12 universes are scattered like broken dolls. Jiren the Grey, the unstoppable force who pushed Goku beyond his limits, kneels in submission, his gray eyes wide with terror. Hit, the legendary assassin who could stop time itself, lies motionless, his body twisted at impossible angles. Even Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan whose power was said to be limitless, has been reduced to a whimpering child, crawling away from something too horrific to comprehend. But this is not the most shocking sight. Standing above them all, his body crackling with energy that makes reality itself bend and warp, is Prince Vegeta. But this is not the Vegeta you know. His hair flows like liquid gold mixed with crimson blood, and his eyes burn with the cold fire of absolute authority. Around his head floats a crown made of pure energy, its design carved from the screams of defeated gods. This is not Super Saiyan. This is not Ultra Ego. This is something that was never meant to exist. Sovereign Ultra Instinct, the forbidden fusion of royal bloodline and divine technique. The Grand Prix Stadium begins to crack as Vegeta slowly turns his gaze toward the VIP section. The angels, beings of unimaginable power who have observed countless universes rise and fall, begin to retreat in genuine fear. Whis, the angel who trained gods, drops his staff and takes a step backward. For the first time in his eternal existence, he feels something he had forgotten was possible. Terror. But even this pales compared to what happens next. High above the arena, in the realm where only the supreme beings dare to dwell, Zeno the Omni King sits on his cosmic throne. The childlike entity who can erase entire universes with a thought suddenly stops mid-giggle. His innocent eyes, which have witnessed the birth and death of countless realities, narrow with something that might be concern. Because Vegeta is looking directly at him. Not up at the sky, not toward the general direction of divine authority. He is staring through dimensions, through the very fabric of existence itself, making direct eye contact with the king of all. And in that gaze, Zeno sees something that makes even his omnipotent heart skip a beat. Challenge. Your Majesty. Whis whispers, his voice cracking for the first time in eons. He's achieved something that the angels thought was impossible. He's made his royal bloodline superior to divine law itself. Zeno tilts his head, the gesture innocent but somehow terrifying. That's not supposed to happen, he says in his childlike voice. No mortal should be able to do that. But as they watch, Vegeta raises one hand toward the cosmic throne. Energy begins to gather around his fingers, not the familiar gold of Super Saiyan or the purple of destruction, but something new, something that makes the laws of physics scream in protest. Prismatic energy, the color of rebellion against cosmic order itself. I am Prince Vegeta. His voice echoes across dimensions, reaching even the ears of beings who exist beyond sound, beyond time, beyond the very concept of existence. I am the heir to the Saiyan throne, and I declare your reign over my strength to be at an end. The blast that follows does not simply destroy, it does not merely erase, it does something far worse. It challenges the fundamental nature of power itself. Reality fractures like glass. The multiverse itself begins to bleed as competing laws of physics battle for dominance. In one timeline, Vegeta's royal authority reigns supreme, crowning him as the absolute ruler of all existence. In another, the natural order reasserts itself, reducing him to cosmic dust. But in this timeline, something impossible happens. Both realities begin to exist simultaneously. As the cosmic dust settles, and the screaming of broken dimensions fades to whispers, two figures stand in the ruins of what was once the Tournament of Power arena. One is Vegeta, his royal form flickering between ultimate power and mortal vulnerability. The other is Goku, but not as you have ever seen him before. His hair is silver, but not the silver of Ultra Instinct. This is the silver of something beyond transcendence, something beyond even the angels' understanding. Kakarot. Vegeta speaks, and his voice carries the weight of cosmic authority. In this timeline, you will never surpass me again. Goku's response is not words. It is not a battle cry or a declaration of friendship. It is something that makes even Vegeta's royal confidence waver for just a moment. Goku smiles, not with joy, not with excitement for battle, but with something far more dangerous. Understanding. Vegeta, he says, his voice carrying a harmony that makes the fractured reality around them stabilize slightly. What if I told you that in trying to become the strongest, you've actually given me the key to becoming something you never thought possible? As Goku raises his hand, energy begins to gather that defies description. It is not power. It is not technique. It is the very concept of possibility given form. And in that moment, both Saiyans realize that their battle has just begun to touch something that will either save or damn every living thing across infinite realities. But how did it come to this? How did the proud Prince of all Saiyans reach a point where he could challenge the cosmic order itself? The answer lies in a single moment of choice that changed everything. A choice that began 3 years before the androids arrived, when Vegeta made a decision that would rewrite the very nature of what it means to be strong. 3 years before the androids were set to arrive, the world knew a different kind of peace. Goku had returned from Yardrat with the mysterious technique of instant transmission, his power having grown tremendously during his recovery from the heart virus that would have claimed his life. The Z fighters trained with renewed purpose, knowing that enemies more powerful than anything they had faced were coming. But for Prince Vegeta, peace was torture. In the gravity chamber of Capsule Corporation, set to an crushing 500 times Earth's normal gravity, Vegeta pushed his body beyond every conceivable limit. Sweat mixed with blood as he pounded his fists against reinforced walls that had been rebuilt dozens of times. Each punch carried the weight of his frustration, his burning need to reclaim what he saw as his birthright. The memory of Namek haunted him like a recurring nightmare. He had been the Prince of all Saiyans, heir to the most powerful warrior race in the universe, and yet a low-class warrior named Kakarot had achieved the legendary transformation first. The golden aura of Super Saiyan, the power that was supposed to be his by royal blood, had manifested in someone who didn't even remember his Saiyan heritage. Kakarot! Vegeta growled through gritted teeth, his voice echoing in the metallic chamber. How dare you claim what belongs to me? But it wasn't just about the transformation anymore. In the 3 years since Frieza's defeat, Goku had continued to grow stronger while Vegeta felt himself falling further behind. The gap between them wasn't closing. If anything, it was widening. During their sparring sessions, Vegeta could see it in Kakarot's eyes. That infuriating calm, that natural understanding of combat that came as easily to him as breathing. While Vegeta had to claw and fight for every ounce of power, Goku seemed to stumble upon new levels of strength almost by accident. The most maddening part was Kakarot's attitude about it all. He never gloated, never rubbed his superiority in Vegeta's face. Instead, he treated their rivalry as something fun, something that pushed them both to be better. He actually seemed to enjoy having Vegeta as a training partner, as if the Prince of all Saiyans was nothing more than a particularly challenging sparring dummy. This casual dismissal of his royal status burned hotter than any insult could have. Vegeta's relationship with Bulma had been growing deeper, though he would never admit it aloud. The brilliant scientist saw something in him that others missed, something beyond the pride and arrogance. She challenged him intellectually in ways that combat never could. When she looked at him, she didn't see a prince or a former villain. She saw a man struggling with his place in a world that no longer revolved around strength alone. But even Bulma's growing affection couldn't fill the void in his warrior's heart. Every time he held her, every moment of peace he found in her presence, a voice in the back of his mind reminded him that he was settling for second place. That somewhere, Kakarot was training, getting stronger, pulling further ahead. The other Z fighters had begun to accept this new dynamic. Piccolo, once Goku's greatest rival, now trained alongside him as an equal and ally. Even Gohan, just a child, was showing potential that might one day surpass them all. The natural order seemed to be that Goku led and others followed. But Vegeta was not others. He was the Prince of all Saiyans, the last son of King Vegeta, heir to a throne that had been destroyed by Frieza but lived on in his royal blood. The very idea of accepting second place went against everything he was, everything he had been raised to believe about his destiny. Late at night, when the gravity chamber finally powered down and silence filled Capsule Corp, Vegeta would stand at the window of his room and stare up at the stars. Somewhere out there, planet Vegeta had once existed. Somewhere in the cosmic void, his father's kingdom had thrived until Frieza's cowardice had reduced it to space dust. King Vegeta had died believing his son would grow up to be the legendary Super Saiyan, the warrior of prophecy who would surpass all others. Instead, that destiny had fallen to a third-class nobody who couldn't even remember his Saiyan name. The injustice of it burned like acid in Vegeta's veins. But what truly terrified him, In moments of brutal honesty that he would never voice aloud, was the growing realization that maybe this was simply the natural order. Maybe Kakarot's pure heart and genuine love of fighting made him inherently superior to someone driven by pride and vengeance. Maybe royal blood meant nothing in the face of a warrior's spirit that found joy in the struggle itself. This thought was more devastating than any physical defeat could ever be. As the 3 years of preparation drew to a close, Vegeta could feel the androids approaching like a storm on the horizon. He knew that when they arrived, the power gap between him and Kakarot would be tested in the most brutal way possible. He knew that once again he would likely be forced to watch from the sidelines as Goku saved the world. The pattern was becoming unbearable. Standing in the gravity chamber, on what would be the last night before everything changed, Vegeta made a decision that would echo across dimensions. He would not accept second place again. He would not watch another enemy fall to Kakarot's power while he remained a supporting character in his own story. If the universe would not crown him through natural means, then he would find another way. Ancient memories stirred in the depths of his genetic code, whispers of power that the royal bloodline had carried for millennia. Techniques and transformations that had been sealed away, deemed too dangerous even for Saiyan kings. His father had hinted at such things during his childhood, speaking in hushed tones about the true power of their bloodline. Power that came with a price so terrible that previous generations had agreed never to pay it. But as Vegeta stood alone in that chamber, feeling the weight of another impending defeat pressing down on him like the crushing gravity itself, he began to wonder if any price was too high to pay for his rightful place as the strongest warrior in the universe. The choice was coming. He could feel it building like pressure behind a dam, ready to burst forth and change everything. Tomorrow the androids would arrive. Tomorrow Kakarot would likely prove his superiority once again. But tonight Prince Vegeta would make a decision that would rewrite the very laws of what it meant to be strong. The gravity chamber hummed with lethal intensity as Vegeta pushed himself through what should have been his final training session before the androids arrived. 500 times Earth's gravity crushed down on his body, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning humiliation that consumed his soul. Blood dripped from his knuckles as he pounded the reinforced walls, each impact creating spiderweb cracks in metal designed to withstand planetary destruction. His mind raced between acceptance and rebellion, the same internal war he had fought countless times before. But this time, something was different. This time, the memories of his ancestors were stirring. Visions flashed through his consciousness, like lightning strikes in a storm. Ancient Saiyan kings wielding power that made gods tremble in fear. Warriors whose very presence could bend reality to their will. The true legacy of the royal bloodline, sealed away for reasons that had been lost to time and Frieza's genocide. No more, Vegeta snarled, his voice raw with emotion. If this universe refuses to crown me through merit, then I will rewrite the very definition of royalty itself. He closed his eyes and reached deep into his genetic memory, searching for something that had been forbidden to his people for generations. The royal transformation was not like becoming a Super Saiyan. It required sacrifice. It demanded that he offer up his very life force to awaken genes that were meant to remain dormant forever. But Vegeta was beyond caring about consequences. Energy began to build around him, not the familiar golden aura of Super Saiyan transformation, but something far more primal. Deep crimson power mixed with silver highlights, the colors of Saiyan royalty that had not been seen since the Old Kingdom's greatest days. The gravity chamber's walls began to buckle as power readings climbed beyond anything the machines had been designed to measure. In the main laboratory of Capsule Corp, every piece of equipment Bulma had built to monitor Saiyan energy signatures exploded in showers of sparks and smoke. Alarms blared throughout the building as energy readings spiked beyond comprehension, showing levels that should have been impossible for any mortal being to achieve. Bulma ran toward the gravity chamber, her heart pounding with terror at what she might find. The energy she was detecting wasn't just powerful, it was wrong somehow, as if it violated the fundamental laws that governed how Ki was supposed to function. Hundreds of miles away, Goku stopped mid-kata in his own training session. His body involuntarily began trembling as he sensed something awakening that felt ancient and terrible. This wasn't the familiar sensation of Vegeta pushing his limits. This was something that made his Saiyan instincts scream warnings of mortal danger. "What is that?" he whispered, cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, despite the fact that he had been training in below-freezing temperatures. On King Kai's planet, the blue-skinned deity stumbled backward in horror as the energy signature reached his enhanced senses. He had felt this type of power before, Eons ago, when the Saiyan race had been young and their royal family had wielded abilities that made even the gods nervous. No, King Kai gasped. He can't be attempting the royal awakening. That technique was banned for a reason. Inside the gravity chamber, Vegeta's transformation reached a critical threshold. His body lifted off the ground as crimson energy swirled around him like a living storm. But this was not a peaceful ascension. His muscles bulged and twisted as his genetic code rewrote itself in real time. Ancient memories flooded his consciousness, showing him techniques and powers that had been sealed away to protect the universe itself. The pain was beyond description. It felt as if every cell in his body was being torn apart and rebuilt according to blueprints written in the blood of God Kings. But through the agony, Vegeta felt something he had never experienced before. True power. Not the borrowed strength of Super Saiyan transformation, but the awakening of what he had always been meant to become. When the energy storm finally subsided, the Prince of all Saiyans floated in the center of the ruined gravity chamber. His hair flowed like liquid gold mixed with crimson blood, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of absolute authority. But most terrifying of all were the ghostly apparitions that surrounded him. The spirits of ancient Saiyan kings materialized in the chamber, their ethereal forms radiating power that made reality itself bend and warp. They looked upon their descendant with expressions of approval mixed with something that might have been pity. At last, one of the royal ancestors spoke, his voice echoing with otherworldly authority. The bloodline awakens to its true potential. But another spirit, his crown more elaborate and his presence more commanding, shook his head sadly. You do not understand what you have done, young prince. The royal awakening was sealed because it creates a hunger that can never be satisfied. Each victory will only make you crave greater conquests. Vegeta ignored the warnings. He could feel the power coursing through his transformed body, strength that operated by completely different rules than anything he had known before. This wasn't just an increase in his fighting ability. This was authority itself, the genetic right to command reality according to his royal will. Let Kakarot come, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate with power. Let him witness what happens when true royalty stops holding back. As if summoned by his words, Goku burst through the remains of the gravity chamber's door. His eyes widened in shock at the destruction around him, but it was the sight of Vegeta that truly stopped him cold. This was not the proud prince he had known and respected. This was something else entirely, something that radiated menace and authority in equal measure. The ghostly kings floating around Vegeta turned their attention to the newcomer, and Goku felt their ancient gaze weighing his soul. Kakarot, Vegeta spoke, and his voice echoed with the power of absolute command, kneel before your true king. But instead of the usual excitement that came with facing a powerful opponent, Goku felt something he rarely experienced. Fear, not for himself, but for what his friend might have become in his desperate pursuit of strength. Vegeta, he said softly, what have you done? The answer came not in words, but in action. Vegeta moved with speed that transcended physical movement, appearing behind Goku faster than thought itself. The punch that followed carried not just the force of his enhanced muscles, but the weight of royal authority commanding reality to make way. Goku barely managed to block, but the impact sent him flying through multiple walls of Capsule Corp and into the city beyond. As he struggled to his feet in the crater his body had created, he realized with growing horror that this was not going to be like their previous battles. This time, Vegeta was not just trying to prove he was stronger. This time, he was trying to establish dominion. The pattern that would define this new timeline began to emerge as they clashed above West City. Every time Goku gained an advantage through superior technique or experience, Vegeta's royal bloodline adapted and evolved. The ancient genetic programming refused to allow defeat, creating an endless cycle where his pride literally prevented him from losing. Each exchange pushed Vegeta to new heights of power, but it also pushed him further from his humanity. The ghostly kings whispered encouragement, showing him techniques that had been used to conquer galaxies in ages past. With each new ability he unlocked, the line between Prince Vegeta and the royal monster he was becoming grew thinner. As their battle raged across dimensions, both fighters began to realize they had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. But it was only when the clash finally ended, with Goku lying broken and bloodied in a crater while Vegeta stood victorious above him, that the true horror of the situation became clear. The royal spirits that had been cheering their descendants' victory suddenly turned hostile, their ethereal faces twisting with anger and disgust. You were never meant to awaken us, pretender, the lead spirit hissed, his voice carrying the chill of cosmic judgment. The royal bloodline was sealed because we could not control our hunger for domination. And you, weakened by human emotion and mercy, are even less worthy than we were. Vegeta's moment of triumph turned to horror as he realized the truth. The transformation was consuming him from within, rewriting not just his power but his very nature. The royal ancestors he had awakened were not allies. They were parasites, feeding on his life force while slowly erasing everything that made him who he was. The awakening cannot be stopped. Another spirit whispered with malicious glee. With each victory, we grow stronger. With each display of dominance, you become more like us and less like yourself. Soon there will be nothing left of the prince who loved a human woman and cared for a half-breed son. As Vegeta screamed in agony, his body beginning to glow with dangerous energy that threatened to tear apart space-time itself, both he and the barely conscious Goku realized that their rivalry had just transformed into something that could destroy not just them, but everything they had ever fought to protect. The choice had been made. The royal bloodline was awakened. And somewhere in the distance, reality itself began to fracture under the weight of power that was never meant to exist. The explosion that followed Vegeta's royal awakening could be seen from space. Half of West City vanished in an instant, not destroyed by conventional energy, but erased by power that operated outside the normal laws of physics. When the cosmic dust finally settled, two figures lay in the center of a crater that stretched for miles in every direction. Goku's body was broken, his orange gi torn to shreds and soaked with blood. But he was alive, his pure heart somehow managing to resist the reality-warping effects of Vegeta's transformation. Beside him, the Prince of all Saiyans convulsed as his body fought a war between his human connections and the ancient hunger awakening in his royal bloodline. Bulma? Vegeta gasped through the pain, his voice flickering between his familiar tone and something far more sinister. Get away from me. But Bulma Briefs was not the type of woman to abandon someone she cared about, especially not when they were in agony. She knelt beside the transformed prince, her scientific mind racing to understand what had happened to him, even as her heart broke at seeing him suffer. "Dad, bring the medical equipment," she shouted to Dr. Brief, who was surveying the destruction with a mixture of awe and terror. "And get every energy reading device we have that's still working. We need to understand what's happening to him." As the Capsule Corp team worked frantically to stabilize Vegeta, neither they nor the wounded Goku noticed the energy signatures approaching from the east. The androids, drawn by the massive power disturbance, had arrived ahead of schedule, but these were not the androids of the original timeline. These androids were afraid. Android 17 materialized at the edge of the crater, his usually arrogant demeanor replaced by genuine concern. The energy he had sensed was unlike anything Dr. Gero had programmed him to expect. It didn't just register as powerful, it registered as wrong, as if it violated the fundamental principles that governed how power was supposed to function. "Sister," he called to Android 18, who appeared beside him with equal caution, "what do you make of this?" Android 18 studied the readings on her internal scanners, her artificial mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The energy patterns don't match anything in our database. It's not just Saiyan power, it's something else entirely. Before either android could decide how to proceed, Vegeta's royal transformation fluctuated wildly. One moment he was writhing in pain on the ground, the next he was floating above them with an aura of crimson and silver that made the air itself bow to his presence. "Artificial beings," he spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to command reality itself. "You dare to approach your king without permission?" The battle that followed redefined what the Z-fighters thought they knew about power. Vegeta's royal bloodline didn't just make him stronger, it made him operate by completely different rules. When Android 17 fired an energy blast that should have been impossible to dodge, Vegeta simply declared it beneath royal notice and the attack curved around him as if it had never been aimed at him at all. Android 18 attempted to use her superior speed to get behind him, but Vegeta's royal authority allowed him to command space itself. Distance became meaningless when he decided it should be. She found herself frozen in place as his crimson aura wrapped around her like chains of pure dominance. "You were created to be perfect," Vegeta said, his eyes burning with cold fire as he studied the androids like insects under a microscope. "But perfection is a concept that bows to royalty." What happened next would have been impossible in the original timeline. Vegeta reached out with his transformed power and began rewriting the android's programming in real time. Not through hacking or technological manipulation, but through the sheer authority of his awakened bloodline commanding their artificial genetics to acknowledge his supremacy. Android 17 screamed as his systems rebelled against themselves, his perfect mechanical body beginning to smoke and spark as conflicting commands tore through his processors. The energy absorption systems that made him nearly invincible began to malfunction, creating feedback loops that threatened to destroy him from within. But it was Android 16 who suffered the most tragic fate. The gentle giant, whose programming made him love nature and life itself, could not comprehend the cosmic wrongness of Vegeta's royal power. His system simply couldn't process the existence of authority that operated outside the natural order. Error, he whispered, as his optical sensors began to flicker and fail. Cannot compute, cannot understand, nature does not work this way. The explosion that followed as Android 16 systems overloaded was mercifully brief. When the light faded, nothing remained of the nature-loving android but a few scattered metal fragments and the memory of his final, confused words. The death of Android 16 sent shockwaves through the remaining Z-fighters who had arrived to witness the battle. Piccolo, Gohan, Krillin, and the others watched in horror as they realized they were no longer dealing with the Vegeta they knew. This transformed prince was capable of casual destruction on a scale that dwarfed anything they had seen before. "We have to do something," Gohan whispered, his young voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "That's not Vegeta anymore. That's something else wearing his face." But before anyone could act, Vegeta's royal transformation reached another critical threshold. The ghostly spirits of ancient Saiyan kings materialized around him, their ethereal forms more solid and menacing than before. They whispered in his ear, showing him visions of galaxies brought to heel by royal authority, of entire civilizations kneeling before the power of awakened Saiyan nobility. Yes, one of the spirits hissed with malicious satisfaction. "Feel the hunger growing. Each victory only makes you crave greater conquests. This is what it means to be truly royal." The energy emanating from Vegeta's transformed body began to affect the environment in ways that defied explanation. Gravity fluctuated wildly in random patterns, creating pockets where objects fell upward or sideways. Time itself seemed to stutter and skip, creating brief moments where past and future bled into the present. Android 17, still struggling with his malfunctioning systems, managed to grab his sister and retreat to a safe distance. "We need to report this to Dr. Garo," he said, his voice filled with an emotion that artificial beings were not supposed to feel. "This is beyond anything he prepared us for." But even as the androids fled, Vegeta's attention was already turning elsewhere. His enhanced senses could detect every power signature on Earth, and he found them all disappointingly weak. The royal bloodline whispered that true satisfaction would only come from conquering beings who could actually challenge his authority. "Kakarot," he said, turning his burning gaze toward Goku, who was struggling to stand despite his injuries. "You still live. How amusing." Goku forced himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest, but his spirit unbroken. "Vegeta, you have to fight this. That power is changing you into something you're not." "On the contrary," Vegeta replied, his voice carrying the terrible certainty of absolute authority. "This power is revealing what I have always been. The Prince of all Saiyans was never meant to accept second place to anyone." Their second clash was even more devastating than the first. Vegeta's royal bloodline had adapted to Goku's fighting style, creating counters and responses that seemed to predict his every move. But more terrifying was the way reality itself seemed to support Vegeta's claims of supremacy. When Goku fired a Kamehameha wave, Vegeta didn't dodge or block it. He simply declared that his royal blood made him immune to attacks from those beneath his station, and the energy wave passed through him harmlessly, as if he had never been there. "This is impossible," Goku gasped, his scientific understanding of ki and energy completely shattered by what he was witnessing. "Nothing is impossible for royalty," Vegeta replied, his crimson aura flaring with renewed intensity. "The universe itself recognizes my authority to rewrite its laws." As their battle raged across what remained of West City, the other Z-fighters could only watch in helpless horror. They were witnessing the birth of something that operated outside the natural order, something that could potentially reshape reality according to its own desires. But the most terrifying realization was yet to come. As Vegeta's royal transformation continued to evolve and adapt, they began to understand that this was not a temporary power-up or a technique that could be countered. This was the awakening of something that had been sleeping in Saiyan genetics for millennia, something so dangerous that previous generations had agreed to seal it away rather than risk its use. And now that it was free, none of them had any idea how to stop it. The immediate aftermath of Vegeta's royal awakening left the Earth changed in ways both visible and invisible. The landscape bore the scars of power that operated beyond conventional physics. The survivors bore the psychological weight of witnessing something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. But most importantly, the balance of power that had defined their world was forever altered. The prince who had once accepted second place was gone, replaced by something that would never accept anything less than absolute supremacy. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient enemies who had thought the royal Saiyan bloodline safely extinct began to take notice of the energy signature that had just announced itself to the universe. The real battle was only beginning. 3 months had passed since Vegeta's royal awakening shattered the peace of Earth, and the world had been forced to adapt to a horrifying new reality where the Prince of all Saiyans operated by rules that defied comprehension. The energy residue from his transformation had created permanent scars across the planet, zones where gravity fluctuated randomly and time itself seemed uncertain. But the most terrifying discovery was yet to come. Cell emerged from his underground slumber ahead of schedule, drawn by the massive energy disturbance that had echoed across dimensions. The bio-android's perfect form was designed to absorb and adapt to any technique, any power level, any fighting style. Gero's ultimate creation was engineered to be the apex of artificial evolution. He was not prepared for what he found. The moment Cell's sensors locked onto Vegeta's energy signature, his perfect biological system screamed warnings that made no sense. This was not just powerful energy. This was energy that operated outside the laws that governed how power was supposed to function. His absorption cells, designed to integrate any type of ki, recoiled from contact with the royal aura as if it were poison. "Impossible," Cell whispered as he observed Vegeta from a safe distance. "My sensors indicate this Saiyan has somehow weaponized his genetic heritage, but that should not be possible." Cell's first attempt at confrontation nearly ended in his destruction. He had planned to absorb the prince while he was distracted, using his tail to drain the royal power and add it to his own perfect form. But the moment his biomechanical cells made contact with Vegeta's crimson aura, they began to malfunction and die. The royal bloodline was not just power, it was authority, the genetic right to command lesser beings to submit. Cell's artificial DNA, no matter how perfect, was still artificial, and artificial could never command natural, especially when that natural power carried the authority of ancient kings. "You dare to touch royalty without permission?" Vegeta's voice carried harmonics that made Cell's exoskeleton crack under the pressure of absolute command. "Kneel before your genetic superior." What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a demonstration of hierarchy. Cell, whose perfect form had been designed to adapt to any opponent, found himself unable to process the concept of authority that transcended physical power. His systems kept trying to analyze and counter Vegeta's techniques, but there was nothing to analyze. The prince was not using techniques, he was exercising dominion. Their conflict spanned multiple dimensions as Cell desperately tried to escape something he could not understand. In the physical realm, Vegeta's royal presence created gravitational anomalies that trapped the bio-android in pockets of twisted space-time. In the genetic realm, his bloodline authority began rewriting Cell's perfect DNA structure, commanding it to acknowledge Saiyan supremacy. "This cannot be happening," Cell gasped as his green skin began to crack and bleed, his perfect cellular structure rebelling against itself. "I am the ultimate life form. I am perfection itself." "Perfection is a concept that bows to royalty," Vegeta replied, his crimson aura expanding to encompass the battlefield. Around him, the ghostly forms of ancient Saiyan kings materialized, their ethereal weapons pointed at Cell's struggling form. But Cell's desperate flight had unintended consequences. His panicked energy signature sent ripples across the earth, awakening powers, and drawing attention from beings that had been content to remain hidden. The royal awakening was like a beacon broadcast across the galaxy, announcing to ancient enemies that the Saiyan bloodline they thought safely extinct had returned to challenge the cosmic order. Meanwhile, Goku's response to Vegeta's transformation was becoming increasingly desperate. The gap between them was not just widening, it was becoming conceptually unbridgeable. How could he compete with power that operated by rewriting the rules of competition itself? His training had taken on a frantic, almost obsessive quality that worried his friends and family. Goku pushed himself beyond every limit he had ever known, seeking some way to match or counter Vegeta's royal authority. but each new level of power he achieved only seemed to trigger another evolution in the prince's bloodline. It was Gohan who first recognized the terrible pattern that was emerging. Every time someone tried to match Vegeta's royal power, it triggered his bloodline to evolve further. Opposition didn't weaken him. It made him stronger, more dominant, more removed from his humanity. "Dad," Gohan said during one of Goku's brief rest periods, "I think we're making him worse. Every time you get stronger, his royal transformation adapts to stay ahead of you." The young half-Saiyan's words carried a weight that made everyone present fall silent. They were trapped in a cycle where trying to help Vegeta only pushed him further into the monster he was becoming. Future Trunks had arrived in this timeline to find a world he didn't recognize. His father, the man who had sacrificed himself to protect Earth from Majin Buu, was now a cosmic threat whose power signature could be detected from other dimensions. The Time Machine's instruments had gone haywire the moment he entered this timeline's temporal stream. "This isn't how it's supposed to be," he whispered, as he observed his transformed father from hiding. "In my timeline, Vegeta learned to balance his pride with his love for family, but this version of him has weaponized his pride into something that's consuming everything else." The most heartbreaking changes were visible in Vegeta's relationship with his family. Bulma watched helplessly as the man she had fallen in love with disappeared behind layers of royal programming and genetic imperatives. He still protected her and baby Trunks, but his protection felt more like the way a king protects valuable possessions than the way a man protects his loved ones. "You are under my royal protection," he had told her after repelling another group of government agents who had come to study his transformation. "No harm will come to those who belong to the Prince of all Saiyans." The words were meant to be comforting, but they chilled Bulma to the bone. She didn't want to belong to anyone. She wanted the partnership they had been building, the mutual respect and growing affection that had been blossoming between them. But perhaps the most disturbing development was the effect Vegeta's transformation was having on other Saiyans. Gohan began experiencing violent headaches and energy fluctuations, his hybrid genetics responding to the royal awakening in ways that terrified his parents. During one particularly severe episode, his power level spiked beyond anything he had achieved during the Cell Games, but his eyes carried the same cold fire they had seen in Vegeta's gaze. The royal bloodline calls to all Saiyan genetics. One of the ghostly kings had explained when Vegeta inquired about his son's condition. "Pure-blooded or hybrid, all who carry our warrior genes will eventually bow to the awakened crown." This revelation sent shockwaves through the remaining Z fighters. If Vegeta's transformation could affect other Saiyans involuntarily, then Goku and Gohan were not immune to whatever changes were coming. Yamcha, driven to the edge of madness by his growing irrelevance in a world of genetic gods, made a desperate decision that would have consequences none of them could foresee. He broke into the ruins of Dr. Guro's laboratory and stole fragments of royal energy that had been left behind during Vegeta's battle with the androids. The transformation that followed was a twisted mockery of Saiyan nobility. Yamcha's human genetics could not properly process the royal power, creating a hybrid form that combined Saiyan arrogance with human desperation. He became something that was neither fully human nor truly royal, a being driven by borrowed pride and artificial authority. Finally, he laughed as crimson energy crackled around his enhanced form. "Finally, I can stand among the gods instead of being left behind." But his victory was short-lived. When Vegeta sensed the unauthorized use of royal power, his response was swift and merciless. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but it demonstrated the true horror of what the prince had become. "You steal the power of kings," Vegeta said as he stood over Yamcha's broken form, "and yet you remain nothing more than a pretender wearing a crown of lies." The energy blast that followed didn't just defeat Yamcha, it erased the stolen royal power from his genetics so completely that he was left weaker than he had been before his desperate gambit. The message was clear to anyone watching. True royal power could not be stolen, copied, or shared. It belonged to the bloodline, and the bloodline belonged to Vegeta. As these events unfolded across Earth, ancient sensors in the depths of space began registering energy signatures that had been dormant for millennia. Beings that had once fled from the Saiyan royal family's conquest began to take notice of the awakening that had just announced itself to the universe. Old enemies who had thought themselves safe from royal vengeance began to remember why their ancestors had feared the crown of planet Vegeta. And in the darkest reaches of space, something far more terrible than any of them had imagined began its journey toward Earth. The royal awakening had sent ripples across dimensions, and those ripples were about to bring consequences that would test not just Vegeta's newfound power, but the very stability of reality itself. Dr. Gero's supercomputer, still functioning in its hidden laboratory, had been analyzing the energy patterns of Vegeta's transformation since the moment of its first manifestation. The conclusions it reached were more terrifying than any of its previous calculations about android superiority or cellular perfection. Analysis complete. The computer announced to its empty laboratory, "Subject Vegeta has achieved genetic transcendence beyond theoretical limits. Royal Saiyan bloodline exhibits capability to rewrite fundamental laws of physics through assertion of inherited authority. Threat level, incalculable." But buried deep in the computer's databanks was a piece of information that would have changed everything if anyone had been there to discover it. Ancient records stolen from Frieza's archives, data about the real reason the Saiyan homeworld had been destroyed. It had not been fear of the legendary Super Saiyan that drove Frieza to genocide. It had been terror of the royal bloodline awakening to its true potential. The Emperor had witnessed what happened when Saiyan kings claimed their genetic birthright, and he had chosen to destroy an entire race rather than risk facing their ultimate transformation again. But now that awakening was happening anyway, in the last pure-blooded prince of a dead civilization, and this time there was no Frieza to stop it before it reached its terrible conclusion. The pattern was becoming clear to those wise enough to see it. Every attempt to oppose Vegeta only made him stronger. Every challenge only pushed his royal bloodline to new heights of dominance. They were trapped in a cycle that could only end in one of two ways. Either Vegeta would consume everything in his path until he stood alone as the universe's sole authority, or something would have to break the cycle before it reached that point. But breaking the cycle would require a sacrifice that none of them were prepared to make. Time was running short, and the gathering storm was about to break over Earth with a fury that would reshape the very concept of what it meant to be the strongest warrior in the universe. The relationships that had once defined the Z-Fighters were cracking under the pressure of absolute power meeting immovable pride. Former enemies had become reluctant allies in the face of a threat none of them fully understood. The androids, those perfect machines of destruction, found themselves in the unprecedented position of being outclassed not by superior technology or enhanced programming, but by something that operated outside the realm of artificial comprehension entirely. Android 17 stood at the edge of a crater that had once been a thriving metropolis, his optical sensors recording energy readings that made no logical sense. "Sister," he called to Android 18, who was running her own analysis of the destruction. "Doctor, Gero never programmed us for scenarios involving genetic authority that supersedes mechanical perfection." Android 18 nodded grimly as she processed the data. "Our energy absorption protocols are useless against power that operates by commanding reality rather than channeling it. We were designed to be the ultimate androids, but we were not designed to face someone who can simply declare our perfection invalid." The most shocking development in this new dynamic came from an unexpected source. Piccolo, the proud Namekian warrior who had once been Goku's greatest enemy, approached the androids with a proposal that would have been unthinkable in any other timeline. "We need to work together," he said bluntly, his cape billowing in the energy-charged wind that seemed to constantly sweep across the scarred landscape. "None of us can face what Vegeta has become alone." The alliance that formed in the shadow of Vegeta's royal transformation was born of desperate necessity rather than mutual respect. Piccolo's analytical mind, Android 17's tactical databases, and Android 18's combat protocols began working in concert to develop strategies that might allow them to survive in a world where conventional power scaling had become meaningless. Their first collaborative effort was a technique that combined Piccolo's special beam cannon with the android's infinite energy reserves. The resulting attack carried enough power to destroy solar systems, but when they tested it against one of Vegeta's training grounds, the royal aura simply absorbed the energy and converted it into fuel for further evolution. "He's not just deflecting our attacks," Piccolo realized with growing horror. "He's using them as stepping stones to reach higher levels of power." But the most heartbreaking transformation was happening within the relationships that had once anchored Vegeta to his humanity. Bulma watched helplessly as the man she loved disappeared behind layers of genetic programming that valued dominance over connection. Their conversations became increasingly one-sided, with Vegeta speaking to her the way a benevolent king might address a favored subject, rather than how a partner speaks to an equal. He still protected her with fierce dedication, but his protection felt more like the way someone guards a valuable possession than the way they care for a loved one. "You are the mother of my heir," He had told her after destroying a military squadron that had dared to approach Capsule Corp. Your safety is paramount to the continuation of the royal bloodline. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they left Bulma feeling more isolated than she had ever been. She didn't want to be the mother of an heir. She wanted to be the partner of a man who chose to be with her because he loved her, not because she served a genetic purpose. Baby Trunks, barely able to walk, seemed to sense the change in his father. The infant would cry whenever Vegeta's royal aura flared too brightly, as if his Saiyan genetics were responding to power that felt wrong on a fundamental level. The most devastating confrontation came when future Trunks finally revealed himself to his transformed father. The young man from the alternate timeline had hoped that seeing his adult son might awaken some vestige of Vegeta's paternal instincts, might remind him of what he was fighting to protect. Instead, Vegeta's response was clinical and cold. You carry my genetic legacy, he observed, studying future Trunks like a scientist examining a specimen, but you also carry the weakness of your mother's timeline. In your world, I allowed sentiment to limit my potential. In my world, future Trunks replied, his voice heavy with grief for the father he had lost, you learn that strength without purpose is just destruction. You became someone worth looking up to. And yet your world fell to threats that this world's Prince of all Saiyans could eliminate with casual effort. Vegeta countered, his royal aura flaring with dangerous intensity. Tell me, son, from another timeline, which version of your father is truly superior? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the very concept of morality. Future Trunks had no answer that could bridge the gap between the father he remembered and the genetic tyrant who stood before him. Their sparring session, intended as a bonding moment between alternate versions of father and son, became something far more sinister. Vegeta used the fight to demonstrate the hierarchy he believed should exist, showing future Trunks that royal blood from this timeline was superior to the diluted genetics of alternate realities. But it was during this confrontation that the most terrible discovery was made. When future Trunks transformed into Super Saiyan to match his father's intensity, something unexpected happened. His golden aura began to shift, taking on subtle hints of crimson and silver. No, he gasped, as he felt his genetics responding to his father's royal awakening. This shouldn't be possible. I'm from a different timeline. But Vegeta's smile was cold and satisfied. Royal blood calls to royal blood across all realities, he explained as he watched his son struggle against the genetic programming that was trying to assert itself. Your timeline may have produced a weaker version of me, but you still carry the potential for true nobility. The implications were staggering. If Vegeta's royal awakening could affect Saiyans from other timelines, then the transformation was not limited to a single reality. It was a genetic imperative that transcended dimensional boundaries. This revelation changed everything about how they understood the threat they were facing. This was not just about one Saiyan prince's quest for supremacy. This was about the awakening of something that could potentially affect every Saiyan across infinite timelines. As future Trunks fought against the royal programming trying to overwrite his personality, his time machine began displaying readings that defied comprehension. Energy signatures were appearing across multiple timelines simultaneously, suggesting that Vegeta's transformation was creating ripple effects that extended far beyond their single reality. The royal awakening is spreading, future Trunks managed to say before his enhanced genetics forced him into a meditation pose, his body instinctively trying to process the competing imperatives of timeline loyalty and bloodline dominance. The Z fighters realized with growing dread that they were no longer dealing with a single transformed individual. They were facing the potential awakening of royal authority across every reality where Saiyan genetics existed. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient beings who had fled from the original Saiyan conquest eons ago began to detect the energy signatures they had hoped never to encounter again. Old enemies who had thought themselves safe from royal vengeance began preparing for a war they had prayed would never come. But perhaps the most ominous development was the gradual change in Earth's other Saiyan hybrid. Gohan's gentle nature, his preference for study over combat, began warring with genetic imperatives that demanded he acknowledge his royal heritage. During a quiet moment in the ruins of what had once been Satan City, Gohan found himself standing in a combat stance he had never learned, his body moving according to patterns encoded in Saiyan DNA that predated the destruction of planet Vegeta. The bloodline remembers, he whispered, as golden energy began to shift toward crimson around his clenched fists. Even diluted through human genetics, the royal programming is still there. Chi-Chi watched her son's internal struggle with a mother's terror, recognizing that she might lose both her husband and her child to genetic imperatives that cared nothing for human concepts of family and love. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of Saiyan genetics across all realities. And at the center of it all stood Prince Vegeta, no longer the proud warrior who had learned to value companionship over conquest, but something far more dangerous. A king who had awakened to his birthright and found the universe itself inadequate to satisfy his royal hunger. The final preparations for the inevitable confrontation began as reality itself seemed to hold its breath. While the scattered Z-fighters desperately sought ways to reach whatever remained of Vegeta's humanity, the transformed prince prepared for what he now saw as his cosmic coronation, the moment when he would claim dominion over all existence through the ultimate expression of royal authority. In the ruins of what had once been Capsule Corporation's main laboratory, an unprecedented alliance was forming. Goku, Gohan, and Piccolo found themselves working alongside the most unlikely ally imaginable. King Cold, the ancient frost demon whose family had ruled through fear for countless eons, had arrived on Earth with knowledge that changed everything they thought they understood about the Saiyan royal bloodline. "You fools," the towering alien said, his voice carrying the weight of eons spent in hiding. "Do you think my family destroyed planet Vegeta out of simple conquest? We acted out of terror. The Saiyan royal bloodline was the original threat that forced us into the shadows. What your prince has awakened is the power that once made gods flee in panic." King Cold's revelation painted a picture of ancient galactic history that none of them had imagined. The Saiyans had not been simple warrior barbarians conquered by superior technology. They had been the apex predators of the universe, with their royal family wielding genetic authority that could command reality itself to submit. "The technique your prince discovered is called the Throne of Eternity," King Cold continued, his usually arrogant demeanor replaced by genuine fear. "It creates a mental realm where the user faces every powerful being who ever ruled anything, from ancient Saiyan god kings to cosmic entities beyond your comprehension. Each victory adds their authority to his own." Meanwhile, in a dimension that existed between thought and reality, Vegeta was indeed experiencing exactly what King Cold described. The mental battlefield stretched beyond the horizon, filled with the spectral forms of beings who had once held dominion over planets, galaxies, and concepts themselves. Ancient Saiyan kings wielding energy that could crack dimensions stood beside cosmic entities whose very presence warped space-time. Rulers from civilizations that had transcended physical existence floated above beings of pure mathematical concept who governed abstract notions like causality and possibility. "Welcome, pretender," spoke a figure whose crown was forged from collapsed stars, his voice echoing with the authority of someone who had once commanded supernovas to serve as his palace lighting. "You seek to claim our combined might, but first you must prove worthy through conquest." What followed was not combat in any recognizable sense. These were battles between concepts of authority itself, conflicts where victory was determined not by strength, but by the absolute certainty of one's right to rule. Vegeta fought entities that had governed the spaces between atoms, beings that had made galaxies dance to their whims, and ancient gods whose names had been erased from existence to prevent their return. With each impossible victory, Vegeta's royal transformation deepened and evolved. His body began to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, his consciousness expanding to encompass levels of authority that mortal minds were never meant to process. The crown of energy around his head grew more elaborate, incorporating symbols and geometries from conquered rulers across countless realities. But the price of this power was becoming increasingly apparent to those who knew him best. Bulma watched helplessly as the man she loved disappeared behind layers of cosmic authority that valued universal dominion over human connection. Their final conversation before the ultimate confrontation was heartbreaking in its one-sided nature. Vegeta spoke to her with the distant kindness of a benevolent emperor addressing a favored subject, but there was no recognition of their partnership, no acknowledgement of the love that had been growing between them. "You have served the royal bloodline well," he told her as his transformed presence made the air itself bow in submission. "When I ascend to cosmic authority, you will be remembered as the mother who gave birth to the prince who inherited eternity." "I don't want to be remembered," Bulma replied, tears streaming down her face as she looked at what had become of the proud, complicated man she had fallen for. "I want you to come back. I want the father who would sacrifice everything for his family, not the king who sees his family as genetic investments." For just a moment, something flickered behind Vegeta's royal facade. a shadow of the man who had once held baby Trunks with such careful tenderness, who had learned to find strength in protecting others rather than dominating them. But the moment passed, swallowed by genetic programming that valued cosmic supremacy above all human concerns. The most devastating discovery came when baby Trunks, barely old enough to understand language, reached out toward his transformed father during what everyone feared might be their final meeting. The moment the infant's hand touched Vegeta's face, the child's Saiyan genetics responded to the royal awakening in ways that defied every natural law. Time seemed to accelerate around the baby as his body aged rapidly through childhood, adolescence, and into teenage years in a matter of seconds. But this was not natural growth. This was genetic programming activating in response to royal authority, forcing the child to mature into a form that could serve the awakened bloodline. "Father," the suddenly teenage Trunks said, his voice carrying the same cold authority that now defined Vegeta's speech, "it is time to claim our throne." The horror on Bulma's face as she watched her infant son transform into something that shared his father's royal obsession was matched only by the terrible satisfaction in Vegeta's expression. "Yes," he said, his voice resonating with cosmic authority, "the bloodline recognizes its destiny." But as the two royal Saiyans stood together, their combined presence began tearing holes in reality itself. The genetic authority they wielded was too much for a single dimension to contain, creating fractures through which glimpses of other timelines became visible. It was through one of these reality tears that the most shocking revelation emerged. Future Trunks, struggling against his own genetic programming in the original timeline, managed to send a desperate message across dimensional boundaries. "This isn't the first time." His voice echoed through the fractured space-time, barely audible above the cosmic storm generated by the Royal Awakening. "I've accessed records from the Time Patrol. This exact scenario has played out across thousands of timelines. Every time a Saiyan prince awakens the royal bloodline, reality splits between cosmic domination and universal destruction." The implications were staggering. They were not facing a unique transformation, but the latest iteration of a pattern that had repeated across infinite realities. Somewhere in the multiverse, there existed timelines where royal Vegeta had succeeded in claiming cosmic authority, and others where the awakening had consumed everything in fires of genetic ambition. But there's something else. Future Trunks continued, his message growing fainter as the reality tier began to close. In every timeline, there's a choice point, a moment where the royal bloodline can be channeled toward protection instead of domination. The problem is that making that choice requires a sacrifice so terrible that most versions of us choose destruction instead. As the dimensional rift sealed itself, leaving them isolated in their transformed reality, both Goku and the assembled Z fighters began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. This was not just about stopping one transformed Saiyan. This was about breaking a cycle that had played out across infinite realities, always ending in either cosmic tyranny or universal annihilation. The most terrifying pattern had already begun to manifest. Every attempt to save Vegeta from his transformation only fed more power into his royal bloodline. Every sacrifice made in his name only convinced the genetic programming that he was worthy of greater authority. They were trapped in a spiral where trying to help him only made him more dangerous. Yamcha's desperate attempt to steal royal power had been crushed so completely that he now existed in a state worse than death, his consciousness trapped in a feedback loop where he experienced eternal defeat at the hands of true nobility. His fate served as a warning to anyone else who might consider challenging the awakened bloodline. Krillin had suffered a complete psychological breakdown after witnessing power that operated outside every framework he understood. The human martial artist who had once stood alongside gods now spent his days in catatonic terror, his mind unable to process the existence of authority that could command reality itself. Even Master Roshi, the turtle hermit whose wisdom had guided generations of fighters, found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about strength and martial arts. "In all my centuries," he whispered as he watched teenage Trunks demonstrate techniques that rewrote the laws of physics, "I have never seen power that operates by commanding existence itself to submit." But perhaps the most ominous development was the effect that Vegeta's royal awakening was having on the planet itself. Earth's gravity began fluctuating in patterns that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Time moved differently in areas where he had spent extended periods, creating pockets where minutes lasted hours and others where days passed in seconds. The very concept of natural law was being rewritten by genetic authority that recognized no limitation except its own ambition. And at the center of it all stood Prince Vegeta, no longer the conflicted warrior who had learned to balance pride with love, but something far more terrifying. A king whose awakened bloodline had convinced him that the only way to protect what he valued was to rule everything that could ever threaten it, even if that meant ruling existence itself. As the final confrontation approached, one truth became inescapably clear to everyone involved. The battle ahead would not be won by superior technique or greater power. It would be decided by whether they could find a way to remind Vegeta of what he had been willing to fight for before genetic programming convinced him to fight for everything. But making that connection would require someone to willingly enter the mental realm where he battled cosmic entities for universal authority, knowing that doing so might mean facing the same genetic corruption that had transformed him into something beyond recognition. The choice was coming, and it would determine not just the fate of their timeline, but whether the cycle of royal awakening and universal destruction could finally be broken across the infinite realities where it continued to play out. Bulma stood at the window of their damaged home, holding the memory of her infant son while watching his teenage form demonstrate power that made gods nervous. "If we can't save you," she whispered to the wind, "then we have to save everyone else from what you've become." The alliance between former enemies was complete, but even their combined might seemed insignificant compared to genetic authority that had awakened after eons of slumber. As reality itself began to warp around the Royal Saiyans, everyone involved realized they were about to face a confrontation that would either save existence or witness its conquest by beings who believed themselves entitled to rule it. The moment of ultimate confrontation had arrived, and reality itself seemed to buckle under the weight of what was about to unfold. The battlefield was not limited to any single dimension or location, but stretched across 7 distinct planes of existence, where different aspects of power, authority, and identity would wage war for the future of everything that had ever existed or ever could exist. In the physical realm, the ruins of West City became the epicenter of a conflict that defied every law of physics. Vegeta and his transformed son Trunks floated above the devastation, their combined royal presence creating gravitational anomalies that turned the remains of skyscrapers into orbiting debris, their crimson and silver auras intertwined like the crowns of cosmic emperors, each pulse of energy rewriting local reality to accommodate their genetic authority. Goku arrived first, but this was not the Saiyan warrior anyone recognized. His training in response to Vegeta's royal awakening had pushed him beyond every previous transformation, achieving something that transcended the normal progression of Super Saiyan forms. His hair was silver, but not the silver of Ultra Instinct mastery. This was something new, something that had been born from the desperate need to match authority with harmony. "Vegeta," he called out, his voice carrying resonances that seemed to stabilize the chaotic energy surrounding the Royal Saiyans. "You don't have to do this. There's still time to choose a different path." But Vegeta's response came not in words, but in demonstration. He moved with speed that transcended physical movement, appearing in 7 different locations simultaneously as his consciousness operated across multiple dimensional layers. Each version of him launched attacks that carried not just destructive force, but the weight of cosmic command. The techniques he unleashed defied description. Imperial annihilation was not simply an energy blast, but a decree that erased the very concept of his target's existence from reality. Where the attack struck, it left holes not just in matter but in the fundamental structure of what was possible. Goku's response was equally impossible to conventional understanding. His transcendent Kamehameha did not oppose Vegeta's royal authority, but flowed around it like water finding its way through stone. The wave of energy grew stronger by absorbing and purifying the hostile power directed against it, transforming cosmic dominance into protective harmony. But the most spectacular aspect of their battle was how it existed simultaneously across multiple planes of reality. While their physical forms exchanged blows that shattered dimensions, their minds were engaged in psychic warfare where pride and humility battled for supremacy over the very concept of strength. In the genetic realm, their Saiyan DNA was literally rewriting itself in real time as competing evolutionary pressures tried to determine what it truly meant to be the ultimate warrior. Vegeta's royal bloodline commanded cellular submission, while Goku's pure heart infected hostile genetics with the virus of compassion. The temporal stream became another battlefield as their conflict created echoes across past and future. Fragments of their battle appeared in prehistoric Earth and far future timelines, their power transcending linear time to wage war across every moment that had ever existed or ever would exist. Meanwhile, other conflicts were erupting across the multidimensional battlefield. Future Trunks found himself fighting not just his transformed father and alternate timeline brother, but temporal echoes of every possible version of himself across infinite realities. Some of these alternate Trunks had embraced royal authority, others had resisted it, and still others had found ways to balance genetic imperative with human compassion. "You cannot escape what you are," snarled a version of Trunks whose royal transformation had been even more complete than this timeline's prince. Across every reality, royal blood demands royal privilege. But another version, one whose scars suggested battles beyond imagination, fought alongside the original. "Royal blood demands royal responsibility," he countered, his sword cutting through genetic programming with techniques that had been learned through eons of struggle. "A true prince serves his people, not his own ambition." The battle between different concepts of nobility spread across dimensional barriers as infinite versions of the same genetic conflict played out simultaneously. Each victory or defeat in one reality created ripple effects that influenced the outcomes in others, creating a web of cause and effect that spanned the entire multiverse. On Earth, the remaining Z-Fighters found themselves facing opponents they never could have imagined. Cell had returned, but his perfect form was now powered by fragments of royal energy he had managed to absorb during his previous encounter with Vegeta. The bioandroid's understanding of perfection had been corrupted by genetic authority, transforming him into something that believed cellular supremacy gave him the right to rule over natural evolution. Piccolo led the defense against Cell's transformed state, but their battle was unlike anything from the original timeline. This was not just a contest of power levels, but a philosophical war between artificial perfection and organic growth. Cell's techniques tried to impose mechanical order on natural chaos, while Piccolo's attacks celebrated the beautiful imperfection that made growth possible. "You cannot defeat perfection," Cell declared as his biomechanical form began to incorporate royal authority patterns, his green skin taking on traces of crimson and silver. "I am the ultimate culmination of evolution itself." "Evolution never stops," Piccolo replied, his own transformation pushing beyond previous limits as he channeled not just his Namekian heritage, but the wisdom of every being who had ever chosen growth over stagnation. "And the moment you believe you're perfect is the moment you stop being worthy of power." But the most heartbreaking battle was taking place in the emotional plane, where Bulma led a desperate attempt to reach whatever remained of Vegeta's humanity. She was not fighting with energy blasts or martial techniques, but with memories and connections that the royal programming was trying to erase. Remember when Trunks was born, she called out across dimensional barriers, her voice somehow penetrating the cosmic storm of authority and dominance. Remember how carefully you held him, how afraid you were of hurting something so small and precious. For a moment, Vegeta's royal transformation flickered. The memory of that tiny, fragile life in his powerful hands created a crack in the genetic programming that valued conquest over protection. But the moment of vulnerability was immediately exploited by the ghostly Saiyan kings who surrounded him. "Weakness!" They hissed in unison, their spectral forms pressing closer to their descendant. "Royal blood does not bow to sentiment. Royal blood commands sentiment to serve royal purpose." The internal war between Vegeta's awakened genetics and his buried humanity became visible as cracks of golden light appeared in his crimson aura. For brief instants, glimpses of the man he had been showed through the mask of cosmic authority, only to be swallowed again by programming that insisted dominance was the only form of love that mattered. But it was teenage Trunks who provided the most shocking twist in the multidimensional battle. As he fought alongside his transformed father, something unexpected began to happen. His royal awakening, forced and artificial rather than natural and chosen, began to rebel against itself. "This isn't what I want," he said, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose rapid aging had not included the emotional development that should have accompanied it. "I don't want to rule everything. I just want my family back." The simple honesty of his words created a resonance that spread across all planes of the battle. Here was royal blood that had awakened not through pride and ambition, but through love and loss. The genetic programming that had transformed him found itself in conflict with emotional imperatives that demanded protection rather than domination. This internal contradiction in teenage Trunks became the catalyst that pushed the entire multidimensional conflict toward its ultimate phase. His struggle between genetic authority and emotional truth created a new possibility that none of the infinite timelines had explored before. What if royal blood could awaken not to dominate, but to serve? What if the ultimate expression of Saiyan nobility was not conquest, but sacrifice? The question rippled across dimensional boundaries, reaching versions of Vegeta across countless realities who were fighting the same battle between pride and purpose. For the first time in the eternal cycle of royal awakening and universal destruction, a new path was becoming visible. But walking that path would require a choice so terrible that it made cosmic annihilation seem preferable by comparison. It would demand that Vegeta voluntarily surrender the power he had fought so desperately to achieve, knowing that doing so might leave him unable to protect what he valued most. As the multi-dimensional battle reached its crescendo, with reality itself splitting between competing visions of what strength should mean, the ultimate question faced every version of the Prince of All Saiyans across infinite timelines. Was he strong enough to choose weakness? Was he royal enough to serve rather than rule? Was he Saiyan enough to sacrifice his pride for the sake of what pride was supposed to protect? The answer would determine not just the fate of their timeline, but whether the endless cycle of genetic ambition and universal destruction could finally be broken across the infinite realities where it continued to play out. The multidimensional battle had reached its most desperate phase, where the very foundations of existence trembled under the weight of conflicting authorities. What had begun as a contest between individual warriors had evolved into something far more cosmic in scope. Reality itself was choosing sides, with some dimensions supporting Vegeta's claim to universal dominion, while others rallied behind Goku's vision of strength through service. In the physical realm, the intensity of combat had transcended anything that mortal beings should have been able to witness. Vegeta and Goku moved through space and time as if they were fluid concepts rather than fixed laws, their battle creating new forms of physics with each exchange of blows. When Vegeta's fist connected with Goku's defense, the impact created pocket universes that spawned and died in microseconds. When Goku's counterattacks found their mark, they healed tears in reality that had been created by royal authority run amok. But it was teenage Trunks who had become the unexpected variable in this cosmic equation. His forced awakening had created something unprecedented in the history of Royal Saiyan transformations. Unlike his father, whose royal power had been claimed through pride and ambition, Trunks had been thrust into genetic authority through love and desperation to reconnect with his family. This fundamental difference in motivation had created a crack in the programming that governed royal bloodline behavior. Where Vegeta's transformation demanded submission from others, Trunks found himself instinctively using his newfound power to protect and heal rather than dominate and conquer. "Father," he said, during a brief lull in the cosmic storm, his teenage voice carrying wisdom that his artificially accelerated age should not have possessed, "what if we've been thinking about royal authority all wrong?" The question struck Vegeta like a physical blow, creating the first genuine moment of uncertainty he had experienced since his transformation began. For a split second, the ghostly Saiyan kings that surrounded him flickered and grew translucent, their hold on his consciousness weakened by doubt. The bloodline teaches us that kings rule over subjects. Trunks continued, his royal aura beginning to shift from crimson dominance to something that resembled golden protection. But what if the true purpose of royal power is to serve those under our protection? What if the strongest thing a king can do is choose not to use his strength? The words created ripples across all 7 planes of battle simultaneously. In the genetic realm, Saiyan DNA across multiple timelines began rewriting itself according to this new interpretation of what royal blood should mean. In the emotional plane, connections between family members that had been severed by authoritarian programming began to heal and strengthen. But the response from the ancient Saiyan spirits was immediate and violent. "Heresy!" they shrieked in unison, their spectral forms becoming more solid and menacing as they fought to maintain their grip on Vegeta's transformed consciousness. "Royal blood does not serve. Royal blood commands. This is the way it has always been." What followed was a battle within a battle as Vegeta found himself fighting not just external opponents, but the very genetic programming that had granted him cosmic power. The ancient kings, who had seemed like allies, revealed their true nature as parasites, beings who had fed on royal ambition for so long that they had forgotten any other way to exist. "You think you can simply choose a different path?" The lead spirit laughed, his crown of collapsed stars burning brighter as he pressed his assault on Vegeta's wavering resolve. "We are your bloodline. We are your destiny. You cannot escape what you are." But teenage Trunks stepped forward, his transformed power now radiating something that the ancient spirits could not comprehend or counter. "You're not his bloodline," the young prince declared with absolute certainty. "You're parasites that have been feeding on Saiyan pride for millennia. True royal blood doesn't need to dominate others to prove its worth." The confrontation between Trunks and the ghostly kings created a new dynamic in the multidimensional battle. Here was royal authority that had awakened not through conquest but through connection, genetic power that had been claimed not for personal ambition but for family unity. Goku, recognizing the opportunity that Trunks had created, achieved something that transcended even his previous impossible transformations, drawing power not from his own strength, but from every life he had ever protected, every friendship he had ever forged, every moment of joy he had shared with others. He reached a state that existed beyond the concept of individual power. Infinite Ultra Instinct was not a technique or a transformation. It was the complete surrender of self in service of everything that made existence worth protecting. His silver aura expanded to encompass not just the immediate battlefield, but every dimension where the battle was taking place, creating harmony from chaos and healing from destruction. But the most spectacular development occurred when Vegeta, inspired by his son's example and Goku's demonstration of selfless strength, made a choice that reverberated across infinite timelines. Instead of continuing to fight for dominance, he turned his royal authority inward, using genetic command not to conquer others, but to conquer the parasitic programming that had been consuming his humanity. "I am Prince Vegeta," he declared, his voice carrying across every plane of reality, "and I command my bloodline to remember what it truly means to be royal." The battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the history of Saiyan genetics. Vegeta used his awakened power to rewrite the fundamental programming of royal authority, transforming it from a tool of domination into an instrument of protection. The ancient kings fought desperately to maintain their grip on his consciousness, but they were facing something they had never encountered before. A royal who was strong enough to reject absolute power in favor of absolute responsibility. The transformation was visible across all 7 planes of battle simultaneously. Vegeta's crimson aura began to shift and change, incorporating elements of gold from his son's protective nature and silver from Goku's selfless harmony. What emerged was something entirely new in the history of Saiyan evolution. Royal harmony was not just a new form of power, it was a new understanding of what strength should mean. Instead of commanding reality to submit, it invited reality to cooperate. Instead of demanding that others kneel, it knelt in service to those who needed protection. But the process of achieving this transformation came at a cost that made even cosmic destruction seem preferable. To reject the parasitic programming, Vegeta had to voluntarily surrender access to the infinite power that Royal Awakening had promised. He had to choose to be weaker in terms of raw strength in order to become stronger in terms of purpose and connection. The moment of choice arrived with crystalline clarity. Vegeta could maintain his cosmic authority and rule over existence itself, or he could give up that power to save his family and protect the universe from the cycle of royal ambition that had destroyed countless timelines. For a heartbeat that stretched across eternity, the Prince of all Saiyans stood at the crossroads between infinite power and infinite responsibility. The ancient kings pressed their final assault on his resolve, showing him visions of all the threats he would be unable to defeat if he chose the weaker path. But then he looked at his son, at the young man whose forced awakening had been motivated by love rather than pride. He looked at Goku, whose strength had always come from protecting others rather than dominating them. He thought of Bulma, waiting somewhere beyond the battle with faith that the man she loved could find his way back to her. "I choose them," Vegeta said, his words carrying the weight of absolute finality. "I choose love over power. I choose service over rule. I choose to be worthy of the title Prince rather than simply claiming it through strength." The explosion that followed was not one of destruction but of creation. Instead of reality being torn apart by competing authorities, it was rebuilt according to new principles that incorporated both individual strength and collective harmony. The ancient Saiyan kings, their parasitic existence dependent on prideful ambition, simply faded away as they found nothing left to feed upon. When the multidimensional storm finally subsided, something unprecedented had occurred across infinite timelines. For the first time in the eternal cycle of royal awakening and universal destruction, a Saiyan prince had chosen to break the pattern rather than repeat it. Vegeta and Goku stood together in the ruins of what had been a battlefield, their forms no longer radiating individual power, but shared purpose. They had become something that transcended rivalry, a partnership that embodied the balance between pride and humility, strength and service. Teenage Trunks, his artificial aging beginning to reverse, now that the crisis had passed, looked at his father with eyes that held both relief and profound respect. "You did it," he said, as his body slowly shifted back toward its natural age. "You broke the curse." But even as reality stabilized around their new understanding of what royal authority should mean, they could sense changes occurring across dimensions that they were only beginning to understand. The transformation of Saiyan genetics that had begun in their timeline was spreading to others, offering hope to countless realities where the cycle of pride and destruction continued to play out. Vegeta looked at his hands, feeling the absence of cosmic power like a phantom limb. He was no longer capable of commanding reality itself to submit to his will. He could no longer claim dominion over existence through genetic authority. But as Bulma ran toward him across the ruins of their former battlefield, her face radiant with joy at having the man she loved return to her, Vegeta realized that he had gained something far more valuable than infinite power. He had gained the strength to choose love over conquest, the wisdom to serve rather than rule, and the courage to be vulnerable in a universe that rewarded strength above all else. "Welcome back," she whispered, as she threw her arms around him, and for the first time since his transformation began, Vegeta felt truly royal. Not because he commanded others to serve him, but because he had chosen to serve others. The battle was over, but its consequences would reshape not just their reality but countless others, where Saiyan genetics carried the potential for both creation and destruction. They had broken a cycle that had persisted across infinite timelines, proving that even the most fundamental aspects of genetic programming could be transformed through conscious choice and sacrificial love. But the most profound change was visible in Vegeta himself. The prince who had spent his entire existence trying to prove his superiority had finally achieved something far greater than dominance. He had achieved the strength to be worthy of the power he had been born to wield. Reality had been fundamentally altered by the choices made during the multidimensional battle, but the changes went far deeper than anyone had initially realized. The universe that emerged from the cosmic conflict operated according to new principles that incorporated both individual excellence and collective harmony. What had once been a reality where strength was measured purely by the ability to dominate others had become something far more complex and beautiful. Earth existed in a strange new state where the very concept of competition had been transformed. The first sign of how profoundly things had changed came during what should have been a simple confrontation with common criminals. When a group of armed robbers attempted to hold up a bank in the rebuilt West City, Vegeta arrived to handle the situation as he had countless times before. But instead of simply overpowering the criminals through superior strength, something unprecedented occurred. His transformed royal authority automatically granted him perfect understanding of their motivations, their fears, and the circumstances that had driven them to crime. Rather than punishing them for their actions, he found himself addressing the root causes of their desperation with the precision of a surgeon and the compassion of a counselor. "You steal because your families are hungry," he said to the startled criminals, his voice carrying an authority that was impossible to ignore but felt nothing like domination. "Your pride prevents you from accepting charity, but it does not prevent you from accepting honest work." By the time Vegeta finished speaking, the would-be robbers had not only surrendered their weapons, but had accepted job offers from Capsule Corporation that would allow them to provide for their families while maintaining their dignity. The entire encounter had been resolved through understanding rather than violence, leaving everyone involved feeling elevated rather than defeated. This pattern repeated itself across the planet as other conflicts were resolved through the new principles that Vegeta's transformation had established. Strength was no longer measured by the ability to crush opposition, but by the wisdom to transform enemies into allies through genuine understanding and mutual respect. The changes in the global power structure were equally dramatic. Gohan, whose hybrid genetics had been affected by his father's royal awakening, found himself becoming Earth's primary protector through an entirely different approach than anyone had expected. Instead of facing threats through overwhelming force, he developed techniques that resolved conflicts by addressing their underlying causes. His first major test came when an invasion fleet from a distant galaxy arrived with the intention of conquering Earth for its resources. In the original timeline, such a threat would have been met with devastating battles that left both sides scarred by violence. But Gohan's response demonstrated how profoundly the nature of heroism had been altered. Instead of engaging the invaders in combat, he used his enhanced understanding to communicate directly with their leaders, learning that their aggression was motivated by desperation rather than malice. Their homeworld was dying, and they had been searching the galaxy for a new planet where their people could survive. "You see us as conquerors because that is what desperation has forced you to become," Gohan said as he stood aboard their flagship, his presence somehow making everyone in the room feel both calm and inspired. But what if there was another way? The solution that emerged was something that would have been impossible under the old paradigm of strength through domination. Earth's technology, enhanced by Bulma's scientific genius and powered by the new understanding of cooperative rather than competitive development, was used to heal the aliens' dying world rather than drive them away from a potential new one. The former invasion fleet became an exploration and healing fleet, spreading the new principles of strength through service to other civilizations that were struggling with similar challenges. What had been intended as Earth's conquest became the beginning of a galactic renaissance based on mutual aid rather than competitive survival. But perhaps the most profound changes were visible in the relationships that had once defined the Z fighters. Vegeta and Bulma's marriage had evolved into something that served as a template for balancing individual excellence with partnership equality. His royal genetics no longer demanded that he dominate their relationship, but rather that he elevate it through his commitment to her growth and happiness. Their conversations became a dance between two equals who challenged each other to become better versions of themselves. Vegeta's strategic genius combined with Bulma's scientific innovation to create solutions that neither could have achieved alone. Their love had become a force that enhanced both of their individual capabilities while creating something greater than the sum of their parts. This is what royal partnership should look like, Vegeta said during one of their late-night discussions about the continuing global changes. Not one person ruling over another, but two people ruling together over the challenges that face them. The transformation of Vegeta's relationship with his son was equally remarkable. As baby Trunks grew under the influence of the new paradigm, he developed capabilities that surpassed even his father's enhanced understanding. The child learned to resolve conflicts through play rather than confrontation, to lead through invitation rather than command, and to demonstrate strength through vulnerability rather than invulnerability. Daddy Young Trunks said during one of their training sessions, "Why do the other kids at school always want to fight when they could just talk?" The question prompted Vegeta to realize that his son was growing up in a world where the old patterns of conflict resolution were becoming increasingly obsolete. Children who learned the new principles from birth naturally gravitated toward cooperation rather than competition, toward understanding rather than judgment. Goku's evolution under the new paradigm was perhaps the most subtle, but also the most significant. His pure heart, which had always been his greatest strength, became something that actively transformed everyone around him. His presence no longer just inspired others to fight harder, but inspired them to fight smarter, with greater compassion and deeper understanding of what they were truly protecting. His training methods evolved to focus not on increasing power levels, but on developing wisdom levels. Students who worked with Goku learned to access strength through connection rather than isolation, to find power through service rather than selfishness. Fighting is still important, he explained to a group of young martial artists who were learning the new techniques, but now we fight to protect what we love instead of fighting to prove what we can destroy. The global martial arts community began to reflect these new principles as tournaments evolved from competitions designed to determine the strongest fighter to celebrations designed to demonstrate the most innovative approaches to conflict resolution. Fighters were judged not just on their ability to defeat opponents, but on their capacity to elevate everyone involved in the competition. But the most remarkable change was in how humanity as a whole began to respond to the presence of superhuman protectors. Instead of feeling helpless in the face of godlike power, people felt inspired to develop their own potential for greatness. The new paradigm suggested that everyone had the capacity for heroism when they focused on service rather than self-advancement. Schools began teaching courses in conflict resolution alongside traditional academic subjects. Businesses started measuring success not just by profit margins, but by their contribution to global harmony. Governments discovered that cooperation with other nations produced better results than competition against them. The ripple effects of Vegeta's transformation extended far beyond Earth as news of the new paradigm spread across the galaxy. Civilizations that had been locked in eternal warfare began to experiment with diplomatic solutions that addressed underlying needs rather than surface disagreements. The legendary Tournament of Power, when it eventually occurred in this timeline, had been transformed from a contest of elimination to a festival of collaboration. Instead of universes fighting to avoid destruction, they worked together to find innovative solutions to cosmic challenges that benefited everyone involved. Even the gods of destruction found their roles evolving as the new principles demonstrated that creation through cooperation was more effective than balance through elimination. Beerus, initially skeptical of the changes, grudgingly admitted that the universe had become more interesting when mortals focused on building rather than breaking. But perhaps the most significant validation of the new paradigm came from an unexpected source. The Grand Zeno, whose childlike nature had always been balanced by the terrible responsibility of maintaining cosmic order, discovered that his burden had been lightened by mortals who had learned to govern themselves through wisdom rather than fear. It's more fun this way, the Omni King declared during one of his visits to Universe 7. Everyone gets to play together instead of fighting all the time. The transformation was not without its challenges. There were those who missed the simplicity of the old paradigm, where strength was measured by the ability to defeat enemies rather than the wisdom to transform them into allies. Some civilizations struggled to adapt to principles that seemed to contradict everything they had learned about survival and success. But the evidence was becoming increasingly clear that the new approach produced better results for everyone involved. Conflicts that had persisted for generations were being resolved in months. Civilizations that had been stagnating under competitive pressure began to flourish under cooperative support. The ultimate test of the new paradigm's effectiveness came when ancient threats that had been dormant for eons began to stir in response to the changes. Beings whose existence had been predicated on conflict and domination found themselves facing a universe that no longer provided the opposition they needed to maintain their identity. But instead of creating new conflicts to feed their nature, many of these ancient entities discovered that they could transform themselves just as Vegeta had done. The choice between evolution and extinction was becoming a fundamental force that shaped cosmic development. The Prince of all Saiyans, standing in the rebuilt Capsule Corporation with his family around him and his former rival, now his closest partner in cosmic stewardship, could see the beginning of something that had never existed before in the history of the multiverse. A reality where strength and wisdom had learned to work together, where individual excellence enhanced rather than competed with collective harmony, where the greatest power was the wisdom to know when not to use power at all. It was a universe worthy of the sacrifices that had been made to create it, and strong enough to defend itself not through violence, but through the irresistible appeal of hope made manifest. The transformed reality had stabilized into something beautiful and unprecedented, but it also raised questions that penetrated to the very heart of what it meant to exist in a universe where harmony had replaced conflict as the primary driving force. The philosophical implications of Vegeta's choice were becoming clear not just to those who had witnessed his transformation, but to beings across dimensions who were grappling with the same fundamental questions about power, purpose, and the nature of strength itself. In quiet moments between the global celebrations of their new paradigm, Vegeta and Goku found themselves engaged in conversations that would have been impossible during their years of rivalry. They sat together in the rebuilt gardens of Capsule Corporation, two warriors who had transcended the need to prove their superiority to each other and instead found strength in exploring the depths of what they had accomplished together. Kakarot, Vegeta said during one of these philosophical exchanges, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen both the heights of cosmic power and the depths of humble service. I spent my entire existence believing that strength meant never accepting second place to anyone, but the real question was never about ranking or hierarchy. Goku nodded thoughtfully, his own transformation having given him insights that went far beyond martial arts mastery. The question was what we were fighting for in the first place. When we fought together instead of against each other, we became something that neither of us could have been alone. We became protectors of possibility itself. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bulma, who carried with her the latest readings from the dimensional monitoring equipment she had developed to track the ripple effects of their transformation. The data she shared revealed something that none of them had expected. The changes aren't limited to our timeline, she explained, her scientific excitement barely contained as she shared her discoveries. The choice you made, Vegeta, has created resonance patterns across infinite realities. Versions of yourself in other timelines are beginning to make similar decisions, choosing service over domination. The implications were staggering. They were witnessing the birth of a multiversal evolution, where the fundamental nature of Saiyan genetics was being rewritten, not through external force but through conscious choice repeated across countless realities. Each timeline where a Vegeta chose love over power made it easier for Vegetas in other timelines to make the same choice. But perhaps the most profound validation of their new paradigm came from an unexpected source. Future Trunks, whose timeline had been scarred by battles against enemies that seemed impossible to defeat through conventional means, reported changes that defied every prediction about how alternate realities were supposed to function. The androids in my timeline have stopped fighting, he said. During one of his visits, his voice filled with wonder at the impossibility of what he was describing. Not because they were defeated, but because the entire concept of conflict for its own sake seems to have lost meaning. They're using their infinite energy to heal the damage they once caused. Even more remarkable was his report about Majin Buu, the ancient force of destruction whose very existence had seemed to embody chaos and malice. He's become something I don't have words for, Future Trunks continued, Still incredibly powerful, but his power serves joy rather than destruction. Children across the world ask for him to visit because his presence makes everything more playful and creative. These reports from alternate timelines confirmed what they had begun to suspect. The transformation they had achieved was not just changing their own reality, but serving as a template for evolution that could be applied across infinite variations of existence. The universe itself seemed to be learning from their example. The conversation took a deeper turn as they explored the personal costs and unexpected benefits of the path they had chosen. Vegeta's admission of his internal struggles provided insight into just how profound his transformation had been. "There are moments," he said, with characteristic honesty, "when I feel the ghost of my old pride, the hunger for the cosmic authority I chose to surrender. The royal bloodline whispers that I could reclaim that power, that I could still rule over existence itself if I were willing to sacrifice what I've gained." But his smile as he spoke carried peace rather than regret. "Then I look at my family, at the world we're building together, at the universe that's becoming something worthy of protection rather than conquest, and I realize that I've gained something infinitely more valuable than dominion. I've gained the strength to choose weakness when weakness serves a greater purpose." Goku's own reflection revealed how profoundly his understanding of martial arts had evolved. "I used to think that getting stronger meant being able to defeat stronger opponents, but now I understand that true strength means helping others become strong enough that they don't need to be defeated. The greatest victory is the battle that never has to be fought." Their philosophical exploration was deepened by the presence of their children, who were growing up in a world where these new principles were not revolutionary ideas, but natural assumptions about how strength should function. Young Trunks and Goten played together with a creativity and cooperation that demonstrated the practical application of everything their fathers had learned through cosmic struggle. "Daddy," Trunks asked during one of their family discussions, "why do the old stories always talk about heroes who had to fight everyone? Wouldn't it be easier to just help everyone become heroes too?" The question, asked with the innocent wisdom that children brought to complex problems, encapsulated the essence of what they had achieved. The old paradigm had created heroes through opposition and conflict. The new paradigm created heroes through cooperation and mutual elevation. But their philosophical reflection also acknowledged the ongoing challenges that came with fundamental change. There were civilizations across the galaxy that struggled to adapt to principles that seemed to contradict everything they had learned about survival and success. The transition from competitive to cooperative thinking required a kind of courage that was sometimes harder to summon than the bravery needed for physical battle. "Change is always frightening," Bulma observed during their discussion, "especially when it requires abandoning strategies that seem to have worked in the past. But the evidence is becoming overwhelming that cooperation produces better results than competition for everyone involved." Their conversation turned to the responsibility they felt as examples of what was possible when beings chose evolution over stagnation. The knowledge that their choices were influencing infinite timelines created a weight of responsibility that was both inspiring and humbling. "Every decision we make now serves as a template for versions of ourselves across countless realities," Vegeta said, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the true scope of their influence. "We're not just living our own lives anymore. We're demonstrating what's possible for anyone who makes similar choices." This realization led them to explore the deeper questions about fate, free will, and the nature of identity itself. If their choices could influence alternate versions of themselves across infinite timelines, what did that say about the boundaries between individual identity and collective consciousness? "Perhaps," Goku suggested with the insight that came from his transformed understanding, "we were never as separate as we thought we were. Maybe the strongest force in the universe has always been the connections between beings, and we're just learning to see those connections more clearly." The philosophical framework they were developing had practical implications that extended far beyond abstract theory. Their understanding of strength through service was creating new approaches to problems that had seemed unsolvable under the old paradigm of strength through domination. Conflicts that had persisted for generations were being resolved through techniques that addressed underlying needs rather than surface disagreements. Civilizations that had been locked in eternal warfare were discovering diplomatic solutions that created benefit for all parties involved. But perhaps the most profound insight came from their recognition that true power had always been about choice rather than capability. The strongest beings were not those who could impose their will on others, but those who chose to use their strength in service of something greater than themselves. "The royal bloodline taught me that kings rule over subjects," Vegeta reflected as their conversation drew toward its conclusion. But the truth I discovered is that real kings rule over themselves first. The greatest authority is self-discipline in service of others. Their philosophical reflection concluded with a recognition that they had become something unprecedented in the history of their universe. Not just powerful warriors who could protect others through strength, but wise teachers who could show others how to protect themselves through understanding. They had evolved from being the strongest fighters in their reality to being examples of what was possible when strength and wisdom learned to work together in service of something greater than individual ambition. The questions they had explored would continue to guide their choices as they helped shepherd a universe that was learning to grow through cooperation rather than competition, to find strength through connection rather than isolation, and to define heroism through service rather than conquest. In choosing to become worthy of their power rather than simply wielding it, they had discovered that the greatest strength was the wisdom to know when strength was not the answer, and the courage to choose vulnerability when vulnerability could heal what force could only break. The final revelations emerged not through dramatic confrontation or cosmic spectacle, but through quiet moments of discovery that connected seemingly unrelated events across time and space. As the transformed reality continued to stabilize and evolve, patterns began to emerge that suggested their journey had been part of something far larger and more intentional than anyone had realized. Bulma's dimensional monitoring equipment had been detecting anomalies that defied conventional understanding of how alternate timelines were supposed to function. Energy signatures were appearing that seemed to predate the Big Bang itself, suggesting that the transformation they had achieved was not a new development, but the restoration of something ancient that had been lost to time and conflict. These readings don't make sense according to any model of multiversal physics, she explained to the assembled group, her scientific excitement tinged with awe at the implications of what she was discovering. The resonance patterns suggest that what we accomplished wasn't revolutionary. It was evolutionary, a return to principles that governed reality before conflict became the dominant force shaping existence. The most intriguing discovery came from analyzing the energy signatures left behind by the ancient Saiyan kings, who had been parasitically feeding on royal pride for millennia. When their influence was finally purged from Vegeta's consciousness, they had left behind traces of much older memories, genetic echoes from the earliest days of Saiyan civilization. These ancient memories painted a picture of planet Vegeta that contradicted everything they thought they knew about their warrior heritage. The original Saiyan civilization had not been built on conquest and domination, but on principles remarkably similar to what they had just rediscovered. The royal bloodline had originally been designed not to rule over others, but to serve as guardians who protected the growth and development of all Saiyan people. The transformation I underwent, Vegeta said as these revelations became clear, was not the awakening of some new power. It was the restoration of what Saiyan royalty was always meant to be before centuries of warfare and trauma corrupted our understanding of strength. But the most significant discovery came from an unexpected source. The Dragon Balls themselves had been responding to the changes in ways that Shenron found difficult to explain. When summoned for routine wishes, the Eternal Dragon's responses carried undertones of recognition, as if the wishes being made were aligning with some fundamental purpose that the Dragon Balls had always been intended to serve. The wishes you make now resonate with harmonies that I had forgotten existed, Shenron revealed during one of their summons. Long ago, when I was first created, the Dragon Balls were designed to facilitate growth and connection rather than simply granting individual desires. Your transformation has awakened that original purpose. This revelation led to the discovery of additional Dragon Balls that had been hidden across the galaxy, not the standard 7 that granted wishes, but ancient ones that served different functions entirely. These Dragon Balls glowed with both orange and blue energy, colors that perfectly matched the aura that Vegeta and Goku shared when they worked together. Further investigation revealed something that recontextualized their entire understanding of their journey. Hidden within the crystalline structure of these ancient Dragon Balls were memory fragments that showed the true history of their universe, a time when cooperation between different species and civilizations had created a golden age that spanned galaxies. The images they saw were breathtaking in their beauty and scope. Civilizations working together to terraform dead worlds into garden paradises, scientific discoveries being shared freely across species barriers, accelerating development for everyone involved, art and culture flourishing as different perspectives combined to create beauty that no single civilization could have achieved alone. But the memories also showed how this golden age had ended. A cosmic conflict had introduced the virus of competitive thinking, the idea that strength meant dominance over others rather than service to all. Gradually, cooperation had been replaced by competition, connection had been severed by conflict, and the galaxy had descended into the familiar pattern of warfare and struggle that had defined their reality. We didn't create something new. Goku realized as the full scope of the revelation became clear. We rediscovered something that had been lost. The universe we're building now is actually the universe returning to what it was always meant to be. The most profound discovery came when they realized that their transformation had not been unique to their timeline. Across infinite realities, the same pattern was playing out as different versions of themselves made similar choices, gradually restoring the cooperative principles that had once governed multiversal civilization. But there were also timelines where the restoration had not occurred, realities where the cycle of pride and destruction continued to play out with increasingly devastating consequences. These darker timelines served as reminders of what could have happened if different choices had been made, shadows that gave depth and meaning to the light they had chosen to embrace. Young Trunks, whose forced aging during the crisis had given him insights beyond his years even after his return to childhood, made an observation that tied together all the threads of their discovery. Maybe every story that gets told is really the same story, he said with the wisdom that children sometimes possessed. Someone has to choose between being strong by themselves or being strong with everyone else. The final revelation came through the most unexpected source of all. Future Trunks, during one of his visits from the alternate timeline that had been transformed by their example, brought with him a message that had been discovered in the ruins of an ancient civilization that predated even the earliest known galactic societies. The message was simple, written in a language that somehow every being could understand regardless of their species or origin. It read, "When pride and purity become one, the shadow reveals the truth." As they stood together in the rebuilt gardens of Capsule Corporation, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed more vibrant than they remembered from before their transformation, they realized they were standing on the ruins of the original fusion dance platform from the Buu saga, carved into the ground beneath their feet. Revealed by the shifting light were those same ancient words translated into every language that had ever existed. But it was Vegeta who made the final connection that brought everything together. Looking at his shadow on the ground, he noticed something that made him question everything they thought they understood about their separate identities. His shadow was performing the fusion dance, synchronized perfectly with Goku's shadow, even though neither of them was moving in that pattern. "Kakarot," he said softly, his voice filled with wonder at the implication. "Did we ever actually separate after our final battle, or have we been fused this entire time?" The question hung in the air like a gentle revelation rather than a shocking twist. As they looked at each other, both simultaneously understanding something that had been hidden in plain sight throughout their entire journey, they realized that their transformation had not been about two individuals learning to work together. It had been about one consciousness learning to express itself through apparent duality while maintaining essential unity. The cracked Dragon Ball that had been hidden in background locations throughout their entire story finally revealed itself, glowing with energy that bridged every timeline and reality where their choice had created transformation. As Shenron's voice whispered across dimensions, the final truth became clear. Some wishes create their own reality, and some realities were always wishes waiting to be made. Their journey had not been about becoming stronger or achieving power. It had been about remembering what they had always been and choosing to express that truth through love rather than conflict, through service rather than domination, through unity rather than separation. The universe they had built together was not a new creation but a restoration, the fulfillment of a wish that had been made at the dawn of existence itself. A wish for beings to remember that their greatest strength lay not in what they could do alone, but in what they could become together. As the final pieces of understanding fell into place, they knew that their story was both ending and beginning. Ending as a tale of conflict and transformation, beginning as an example of what was possible when consciousness chose love over fear, cooperation over competition, and unity over separation. The shadow had revealed the truth, and the truth was beautiful beyond words. The story that began with cosmic destruction and dimensional warfare had reached its conclusion, but the ending was unlike anything that had ever been recorded in the annals of multiversal history. There were no final battles to be won, no ultimate enemies to be defeated, no last transformations to be achieved. Instead, there was simply the quiet recognition of truth that had been present from the very beginning, waiting patiently to be discovered beneath layers of pride, ambition, and the illusion of separation. In the years that followed their Great Awakening, the universe continued to evolve in ways that validated every choice they had made during those crucial moments when reality itself had hung in the balance. The ripple effects of Vegeta's transformation from cosmic tyrant to universal guardian continued to spread across infinite timelines, creating a cascade of positive change that seemed to have no limit or boundary. Children born in this new paradigm grew up with an intuitive understanding of cooperation that their parents had to learn through struggle and conscious choice. To them, the idea of solving problems through conflict seemed as outdated as using stone tools when advanced technology was readily available. They naturally gravitated towards solutions that elevated everyone involved rather than determining winners and losers. Schools across Earth and eventually across the galaxy began teaching what became known as Saiyan philosophy, though the name was somewhat misleading since the principles had been rediscovered rather than invented by the warrior race. The core curriculum focused on finding strength through service, achieving individual excellence through collective support, and understanding that true power was always a choice rather than an acquisition. The martial arts world underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. Tournaments evolved from competitions designed to determine the strongest fighter into celebrations of the most innovative approaches to conflict resolution. Masters were judged not just on their ability to defeat opponents, but on their capacity to help others discover their own potential for greatness. Goku established training schools that became pilgrimage destinations for beings from across the galaxy who wanted to learn how to access strength through connection rather than isolation. His teaching method was beautifully simple. Every technique was learned through partnership. Every skill was developed through helping others, and every advancement was measured by how much it contributed to the growth of the entire community. Fighting is like dancing, he would tell his students, his simple wisdom carrying depths that philosophers spent years analyzing. When you're dancing with someone, the point isn't to defeat them. The point is to create something beautiful together that neither of you could create alone. Vegeta's approach to teaching was more structured but equally transformative. His schools focused on what he called royal responsibility, the understanding that true nobility came from serving others rather than ruling over them. Students learned to channel their pride into excellence that elevated their communities rather than separating them from others. "A prince who needs subjects to bow before him is no prince at all," became one of his most quoted teachings. A true royal makes everyone around them feel royal as well. But perhaps the most remarkable development was how their transformation affected the cosmic hierarchy itself. The gods of destruction found their roles evolving as mortals learned to govern themselves through wisdom, rather than requiring balance through divine intervention. Beerus, initially resistant to the changes, eventually admitted that the universe had become far more interesting when mortals focused on creation rather than destruction. "I haven't had to destroy a planet in decades," he mentioned during one of his visits to Earth, his tone carrying surprise rather than complaint. "These mortals have learned to handle their own problems before they become universe-threatening catastrophes." The angels, beings whose existence had been defined by their role as trainers and observers of cosmic balance, discovered new purposes as facilitators of growth rather than maintainers of equilibrium. Whis began teaching advanced techniques to mortals, not to prepare them for greater battles, but to help them become better teachers for the next generation of cosmic citizens. Even the Grand Zeno found his burden lightened as the multiverse learned to maintain harmony through conscious choice rather than requiring oversight from ultimate authority. His childlike joy became more pronounced as he discovered that existence was more fun when everyone was playing together rather than fighting for survival. "It's like the whole universe learned how to be friends," he observed, with the innocent wisdom that made his simple statements carry profound truth. The most beautiful validation of their transformation came through the evolution of the Dragon Ball system itself. The ancient Dragon Balls that had been discovered during their journey began to manifest throughout the galaxy, but these were not tools for granting individual wishes. They were instruments of collective manifestation, allowing communities to create positive changes that benefited everyone involved. When these new Dragon Balls were gathered and activated, Shenron appeared not as a mighty dragon to be petitioned, but as a gentle guardian whose purpose was to facilitate the highest good for all beings involved in the wish. The wishes themselves evolved from requests for personal power or advantage to expressions of desire for universal flourishing. "I wish for all beings to have the opportunity to discover their highest potential," became a common type of wish, and Shenron would grant such requests by creating circumstances that allowed for growth, learning, and positive transformation across entire star systems. But the most profound changes were visible in the daily lives of ordinary beings across the galaxy. Conflicts that once would have escalated into warfare were being resolved through dialogue and mutual understanding. Economic systems evolved from competition-based models to cooperation-based ones that created abundance for everyone involved. Artists and creators found that collaboration produced works of beauty and meaning that far surpassed anything they could achieve individually. Scientists discovered that sharing knowledge freely accelerated discovery for everyone, rather than creating competitive advantages for some. The very concept of scarcity, which had driven so much conflict throughout galactic history, began to fade as civilizations learned that cooperation could create abundance even from limited resources. When everyone worked together to solve problems, solutions emerged that benefited all parties involved. Love stories across the galaxy began to reflect the new paradigm as relationships evolved from possession-based models to partnership-based ones. Couples learned to grow together rather than competing with each other, creating bonds that strengthen both individuals while contributing to the health of their communities. Families became sources of empowerment rather than limitation, as parents learned to support their children's unique gifts rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. Children grew up feeling valued for who they were, rather than pressured to meet external expectations of who they should become. The ultimate testament to the success of their transformation came when ancient enemies from the deepest reaches of space arrived at Earth, not as conquerors, but as students. Beings whose civilizations had been built on principles of domination and conquest found themselves drawn to learn about the new paradigm that seemed to create strength through service rather than power through oppression. We have traveled across galaxies seeking the source of the energy signature that has been transforming reality itself, their spokesman explained during the first diplomatic contact. Our people are dying from the spiritual emptiness that comes from endless conflict. We have come to learn how to live, rather than simply how to survive. These former enemies became some of the most dedicated students of the new principles, their transformation from conquerors to healers serving as examples of what was possible when beings chose evolution over stagnation. Their civilizations became beacons of hope for other struggling societies across the cosmos. As the years passed and the new paradigm continued to spread and deepen, those who had been present during the original transformation began to understand that they had participated in something that transcended personal growth or even universal evolution. They had been part of the universe, remembering its original nature, returning to principles of love and cooperation that had always been its true foundation. The story that had begun with Prince Vegeta's desperate attempt to never accept second place had evolved into a demonstration that there were no places at all, only beings choosing moment by moment whether to express their highest nature or remain trapped in patterns that served no one. In quiet moments, when the cosmic significance of their journey felt overwhelming, they found comfort in the simple truth that had guided them from the beginning. Love was stronger than pride, service was more powerful than domination, and unity was the natural state that all consciousness eventually returned to when given the choice between separation and connection. The universe they had helped restore was not perfect, for perfection would have meant the end of growth and change, but it was beautiful, and it was becoming more beautiful with each choice made by beings who had learned that their greatest strength lay not in what they could accomplish alone, but in what they could become together. The shadow had revealed the truth, and the truth had set them all free to become who they had always been meant to be.